Hi, everybody. We are Project 22 of Ethical Consumption Before Capitalism. So, what does ethical consumption entail? Today, it often means making purchases that involve more environmentally friendly materials and are generated by laborers who work under fair conditions. But how is that concept of ethical consumption different during the early modern period in pre-capitalist Europe? The objective of this project is to analyze the relationship between consumption and ethics. We used philosophical and religious understandings of ethics to analyze specific consumption items: gold, silver, tobacco, beer, and wool. Our dataset comes from early English books online, EBO. The final dataset we performed our analysis on came out to be over 10,000 texts and covers the years 1580 to 1630. For cleaning our dataset, because we're using the bag of words model, we removed all punctuation. We also removed unwanted characters like ampersands. For normalizing, we use this program called Bard. For the next few parts of the presentation, we'll zoom in on our visuals so you can see them better.
All right. The next step that comes in our coding flow after cleaning and normalizing text is topic modeling. Topic modeling is a process to automatically identify topics presented in a corpus of text. I'm sorry, can you hear me okay? Okay, good. And to derive hidden patterns in that corpus. It is an unsupervised clustering method, and we are choosing to do unsupervised learning because this refers to finding structure in unlabeled data, which our data set is. In our topic model, we first create a document term matrix, which is a mathematical matrix that describes the frequency of terms occurring in a collection of documents. This is then fed in as an input to our latent Dirichlet association topic model, which is a popular topic model that matches text in a document to a particular topic. You can also set the number of topics that you want. Topic modeling is important to this project because we used it to filter for texts that are relevant to us. By creating a new topic model for each individual clean text, we then compare the words in that output from the topic model to two lexicons that we created to determine whether that text is relevant to our analysis or not. And we only uploaded those relevant ones to a new folder in our Box account. We also had two lexicons, one for religious terms and one for philosophical terms.
We then started sentiment analysis by creating context windows, which were the 5 words surrounding both the right and the left side of the consumption words that we had analyzed. After we conducted a dictionary-based sentiment using Vader, in order for Vader to work to its fullest, we had to update the Vader lexicon with customized sentiments that best fit our time period. Looking at the descriptive statistics box plot, which is on the left, and the distribution box plot, which is on the right, we notice gold and silver are both top heavy in distribution. Beer and tobacco have largely positive sentiments, possibly due to the fact that consuming these intoxicants were often seen as sophisticated, something done by only the upper echelon of society. Wool is the only item that is skewed more negative, which we attributed to metaphors and wool production. Metaphors like a wolf in sheep's clothing, and additionally, during this time period, to boost wool production, many landowners evicted the tenants that farmers used to raise sheep.
Along with the sentiment analysis, we also used word2vec to generate what's known as word embeddings. This is a process that takes words in our data set and transform them into vectors in a mathematical vector space. With these word vectors, we were able to calculate the cosine of the angle between certain vectors using linear algebra. And this gives us what's known as cosine similarity. It's a measurement of how related two words are based on how they're used within text. So using cosine similarity, we selected a set of religious and philosophical words, and we plotted this heat map that shows the similarity between pairs of words. And the cool thing about this heat map is you can see that there's clearly two clusters. If you look at the orange in the top left and in the bottom right, the top left corresponds to words that relate to religion, and the bottom right corresponds to philosophical words, which indicates that there is a distinction between these two ideologies. And using this heat map, we were able to generate, or we separated out our words into two sets, religion and philosophy. And then we plotted the cosine similarity of religion and philosophy to each of our consumption items over time to get an idea of how these words changed in their meaning as time passed. So looking at these line graphs, some of the things that we can see are that all of these words seem to be more related with philosophy than with religion. Another interesting thing is that the upwards and downwards trends seem to match for both religion and philosophy. And finally, with beer and wool, you can see here that the religious cosine similarity seems to go below 0. And this is a really interesting issue because it's hard to interpret what a negative cosine similarity means. And this is something that leads into our future research that we hope to do on this project.
So we believe that the next steps for our project should include exploring negative cosine similarity relationships, developing frequency graphs to discover other consumption items that may be worth analyzing, researching ways to distinguish metaphorical language from literal language, and then reconstructing our text lexicons.
We would like to give a special thank you to our project leads who are here today, our project manager, Team 17, and the Data Plus coordinating team. To check out our references and details of the project, please visit our website and GitHub.
All right, thanks, guys. We'd like to open it up to questions. If anyone has any, if not, I'll start.
I just one sort of maybe vague question to start with. This is all really interesting, and I was just curious if you had considered, you know, for the future of this project, any tie-ins with like current data for ethical consumption. I mean, I would assume that those harvesting that would be a lot more complicated. Maybe I'm not sure because I don't have a computational background. But have you guys considered any scenarios where you sort of take this model and apply it to more current data?
Actually, I think for the scope of this project, I think it's definitely like an interesting thing, and it actually might be easier because modern data is already like it's already in standardized English, and there's like there are already a lot of papers on how to apply these techniques to modern data. Our main challenges were figuring out how to like retroactively fit these to like older texts. But I think in terms of like the results, while it would be really interesting, I think it kind of like muddies what we're trying to look at, which is exactly like what does ethical consumption look like before capitalism and before the like economy that we have in today's world. So I mean, I think having like a compare and contrast eventually would be really cool. But as of right now, I think we would like to, there's still so much to do within this short time period from 1580 to 1630. So we'll have our hands full with that for a while.
That makes sense.
Dr. Collierbank, I think, had a question.
Thank you, Ariel. So there was a bunch of Data Plus groups who were using natural language processing, and I was just curious about what you learned from some of those other groups, what they might have learned from you. Could you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so we most closely work with Team 17, who's giving a presentation later today. And for them, we kind of worked really closely because we had the same data set. So we exchanged code for, you know, cleaning the data and normalizing the spellings. And we kind of we talked to each other pretty regularly. We had like meetings every Friday to kind of go over what we did. I briefly connected with the Rubenstein Libraries team, and I just passed along sentiment analysis, like articles that we referenced to them.
I think we also noticed a lot from like the presentations that we were definitely on the right path, and that our code was, the packages that we were using were matching with others. So it just kind of reassured us that we were still on the right path for what we were doing.
So,
And
I'm sorry, I was also curious about, I was curious about this putting together of the, if you like, the literary context and the word nerd stuff. What your experience was? I mean, what was new to you in this project? Was the NLP stuff new? How do you think you might use that going forward?
Okay, so to address your first part, like with the literary context, we have our project leads to thank for getting us up to speed pretty quickly, because though it got really technical towards the end, this project, for the first, I'd say up to 2 to 3 weeks, we spent a lot of time like doing due diligence to framing the question, reading a lot of context material just to understand the time period and ethical consumption in the early modern period. But then afterwards, a lot of the technical stuff, and I'm proud of our team for doing this, was done independently when we split into our code flow. Like my experience personally with the topic modeling, I had never really done that before. And it involved just following like a lot of tutorials, and I got to learn about like very important concepts like the bag of words model, what a document term matrix is. And I can see that being really useful going forward, because whenever I'd share with my parents, like whenever I was excited about the updates, when our topic modeling was progressing, my dad mentioned that people in his workplace work with that frequently. And for some reason, up until then, I never imagined it outside the scope of our project, but it's good to know that these skills are very transferable to other places.
I see. I'm also wondering, I mean, so in some sense, there's all of this modern code, and you're applying it to these early English books online. I guess it didn't always work.
Yeah. So of course, like a big part of this project is trying to figure out how to handle that. You may have noticed that we're using a sentiment analysis dictionary, and that we you have to kind of like see with a grain of salt, because the dictionary is obviously based on modern usage and modern definitions. We were able to kind of offset that because with Vader, we were actually able to kind of like update the lexicon and its sentiment scores, but there's so many sentiment analysis attempts that we tried that partly failed or didn't work that well because the text was in Old English. So yeah, that was definitely a challenge.
And to add on to that, along with the fact that like dictionary definitions and the connotations of words have changed a lot since this time period, we also had to deal with lots of spelling variations too. One very common one is the letters I and J are very interchangeable during this time period. And it poses quite a big problem because one word or the same word spelled once with an I and the second time with a J, they represent the same word. And ideally we should have them, or we should have all the data for both of those spellings in one place, but there's no way to guarantee that. And so it leads to some information loss or some redundancies, and it's very hard to go through and clean every single instance of those like spelling mistakes. So it was definitely a big challenge to fit these techniques to our data set.
To add on to that, the punctuation and grammar was different, but we removed all of that, but still just looking at it was just to show the difference between that time period versus now. It was kind of cool to see how different their writing was.
I guess I have a question in terms of your sentiment analysis. Did you find that the meanings of these words evolved much in the time span that you were looking at, and in what ways, if so?
I believe they did evolve a lot, considering that some words that we would see as neutral now were like definitely negative then, and other words that we see as like positive now were considered negative then. Or for us, like addiction is considered not necessarily bad for their time period, versus now it's definitely negative and not seen in a like great light. So I think they definitely have changed over time.
Yes, and to add on to that, even within the time period we were examining, the sentiments were so variable for like the same consumption item. And we like when we went back in after seeing these box plots to go see what's up with these really negative outliers, especially for wool and beer, we noticed that a lot of it came from um, them being used in a metaphorical way rather than like their economic, like physical way. Um, like Abhishek, what was that metaphor about having wool for brains? I think that generated like a very negative sentiment for that piece of the text. So that really is like an important future direction to explore, because that metaphorical use like impacted the sentiment so much.
Yeah, I would imagine all kinds of things culturally and going on at the time would affect the meaning of a word so much that tracking the data over a long period of time would be challenging, because the meaning has changed in that amount of time as well. I was wondering how you guys dealt with that. Yeah. Please, other questions? So what part of the data did you guys find the most challenging this summer?
So speaking personally, I think the text cleaning and normalizing definitely took the longest time. We were doing that like it was to the point where we had like we were writing scripts to do the sentiment analysis and the cosine similarity, and we were still not like halfway done cleaning our texts. And so that was a very stressful thing for me. It's just like knowing wondering like when are we going to finish like compiling all our data. um and also I feel like that had the biggest impact on like the validity of our results, because of what we mentioned earlier with the punctuation and the spelling and all. Is like if we didn't clean the text properly, there's like a saying for machine learning, like if you put garbage in you get garbage out. And it is very true with this too. We don't a lot of our results depended heavily on that first step. So that's what I thought was the most challenging and the most stressful.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think for us, we were like once we cleaned like a set small subset of our data, it was pretty not easy, but it was it took less time to I think code everything. And it took such a long time just to process things. And like we wanted to try some things, but then be like, oh no, that take too long to process the data because we do have 10,000 texts and EBO itself has probably over 60,000 texts, so that we had to like filter and clean and normalize. So it was just a lot of like processing the data. And I agree with Abhishek that that was probably the more stressful part, because we're like, when will this ever finish kind of thing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So had any of you had experience with programming languages before this summer?
I guess I'll speak again. I had some, but it wasn't in the context of data science. It was more, like your typical CS classes. So yes, but also for this project, I guess the way you think about code or like the different packages used for code is quite different.
My experience with programming has like has mostly been in like mathematical or scientific computing and like optimization stuff. But so this like natural language processing was very new to me, but it was very interesting. And I think that the math background helped me get into it a little easier.
Yeah, it's funny because I also like I'd taken some CS classes before, but I was better like prepared with Java rather than with Python because I hadn't explored that since maybe middle school. But once we started the coding portion of this project, like had to get back into it very quickly. And it helped, I think, having like a goal to work towards rather than just like arbitrarily learning syntax here and there. It was a lot easier to like pick back up, and learning R for the first time wasn't bad at all either.
Yeah, this was my first time working with R, and I was familiar with Python, not like an expert nearly, but I was familiar with it. But R was definitely really cool, and I'm glad I got to learn a lot of it.
Yeah, so I have a question real quick. I'm wondering what your biggest takeaways were from this project. I imagine that this was kind of an area of learning a discipline that you've not really explored too much before. And so I'm wondering, were you just kind of really trying to tackle the data and getting your head around that, or did you learn and were you exposed to some things that kind of led you into new directions of inquiry? Hope that made sense.
Yeah, it did. I think that we all had an open mind, so I definitely am way more interested in this time period. Definitely before this project, I wasn't a huge history fan, but seeing it applied in this format and seeing it, how it relates to the modern period and how everything just really ties in together has definitely made me more interested in this time period. And of course, working with R and the different packages has definitely made me more interested in that side of code and data science in general. So.
Yeah, I agree. And then to like talk about your point about finding new uh finding new like places to like discover things. I think that's a big thing. I found that like anytime we did any sort of analysis, whether it was like the topic modeling or sentiment analysis or cosine similarity, it always seemed to raise more questions than it answered. And I don't think that's because we were doing it incorrectly. It's more that this is such like a broad question, and it's such a like the topic has like room for so much analysis and so much so many different projects that we're kind of we always seem to like touch on the surface of a bunch of different things, and we would love to like keep working on it and explore some of those possibilities in more detail after this summer ends.
All right, folks, we've got about 5 more minutes left if anyone has any other questions.
You guys talked about wool and metaphor. Any thoughts on what's going on with beer? Are we going to see some weird beer metaphors? Possibly. I know, unfair question.
It's very possible. I think that all of the goods have some sort of metaphorical meaning. And I think like with beer, we know that when was talking about beer versus ale, there's a lot of like social commentary or like things of distinction between classes and between genders and stuff. So there's definitely like a lot of like implied meaning or implied like sentiment when it comes to those kind of things. And so I think that requires a lot of extra reading for us and just a lot more time to play around with the data.
Yeah, just to add on to Abhishek's point of like ale, because we know that, like ale came earlier in ale has some like negative connotations at this point, especially in connection to women. So it would be interesting to see how, I guess, the sentiment around beer would shift as, we get either further into time period or maybe just even deeper into this time period.
Yeah, and I just because it's like easy to have like on hand, I just opened up our beer text and sentiment like CSV just to try to identify if there's a pattern going on. The positive ones seem to always talk about beer in some economic context and its value, and like literally explicitly using the word business right next to beer. Whereas the negative ones I've seen, once again, tons of metaphor tossed in there. And also it's like next to some sort of plight, like someone is talking about their sorrows in jail, and then someone else is insulting someone and throws the word beer in there, probably calling them a drunkard. So once again, and this like I guess applies to wool too, the negative sentiments seem to like make it so that it's a lot more contextual and situation specific and metaphor based, whereas positive is in some sort of like trade context.